Hello horror lovers, welcome to the channel. Before the terror begins, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, as it will help me a lot. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because Jack Winters stumbled through the dense underbrush, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The beam of his flashlight danced erratically across the forest floor as he pushed aside branches and vines. Sweat trickled down his back despite the cool night air, and his heart pounded in his chest like a trapped animal. "This can't be happening," he muttered, pausing to catch his breath. "I've hiked this trail a dozen times." He fumbled for his phone, hoping against hope that he'd somehow regained signal. The blank screen mocked him, showing no bars and a battery hovering dangerously close to empty. "Damn it," Jack cursed, shoving the useless device back into his pocket. The forest seemed to press in around him, the trees looming impossibly tall in the darkness. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent his imagination into overdrive. Was that just the wind? Or something more sinister? Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Okay, think. What did that ranger say about getting lost? He closed his eyes, recalling the safety briefing he'd barely paid attention to earlier that day. Stay put, right. I should stay put and wait for daylight. But even as the thought formed, a chill ran down his spine. The night was unnaturally quiet. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of his own breathing. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice sounding small and frightened in the vast darkness. "Is anyone out there?" Silence answered him. Panic began to set in, clawing at the edges of his mind. What if no one found him? What if he died out here, alone in the woods? "No," Jack said firmly, shaking his head. "No, I'm not going to let that happen." He was about to start walking again when he heard it. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. Music. At first, Jack thought he must be imagining things, but as he strained his ears, the sound became clearer. Cheerful, lilting notes drifted through the trees, like something from an old-fashioned carnival. "Hello?" he called again, louder this time. "Can anyone hear me?" The music continued, seemingly oblivious to his cries. Hope bloomed in Jack's chest, pushing back the tendrils of fear that had been threatening to overwhelm him. Where there's music, there must be people, he reasoned aloud, a grin spreading across his face. And where there's people, there's help. Without a second thought, Jack plunged into the underbrush, following the sound. Branches whipped at his face and thorns tore at his clothes, but he barely noticed. All that mattered was getting to that music, to safety. As he pushed through a particularly dense patch of foliage, the trees suddenly opened up before him. Jack stumbled to a halt, his mouth falling open in amazement. A clearing stretched out before him, bathed in warm, flickering light. Dozens of lanterns hung from the trees, casting a golden glow over the scene. And there, in the center of it all, were the dancers. Relief flooded through Jack, making his knees weak. "Thank God," he breathed, taking a step forward. "Hey, over here. I need help." But as the figures turned towards him, the words died in Jack's throat. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Where their faces should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin. And they were coming towards him, arms outstretched in silent invitation. Jack's heart thundered in his chest as he pushed through the dense foliage, the cheerful music growing louder with each step. Branches snagged at his clothes, and unseen roots threatened to trip him, but he pressed on, driven by a mixture of hope and curiosity. "Hello?" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" The only response was the continued melody, drifting tantalizingly through the trees. As Jack stumbled forward, he caught sight of a warm glow flickering ahead. His breath caught in his throat, equal parts relief and apprehension flooding through him. "Please be real," he muttered, quickening his pace. "Please don't be some weird forest hallucination." Suddenly, the trees parted and Jack found himself on the edge of a clearing. He blinked rapidly, his eyes struggling to adjust to the scene before him. The area was bathed in soft, golden light emanating from dozens of lanterns hanging from the surrounding trees. The effect was magical, transforming the once menacing forest into something out of a fairy tale. In the center of the clearing, figures moved in graceful, synchronized motions. Their clothes were unlike anything Jack had ever seen outside of a historical movie. Women in flowing dresses with high collars and puffed sleeves, men in tailcoats and top hats. They twirled and stepped in time to the music, which Jack now realized had no discernible source. For a moment, Jack simply stood there, mouth agape, trying to process what he was seeing. Relief warred with confusion in his mind. Excuse me?" he called out hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm lost and I could really use some help." None of the dancers acknowledged him. They continued their fluid movements as if he didn't exist. Jack took a tentative step into the clearing. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" Still no response. Frowning, Jack moved closer to the nearest couple. As he approached, he began to notice subtle oddities. The dancers' movements, while graceful, had a certain mechanical quality to them. And their faces, Jack's stomach churned as he tried to catch a clear glimpse of their features. Something was off, but in the flickering lantern light, he couldn't quite put his finger on what. "Okay, this is getting weird," Jack muttered to himself. He reached out to tap the shoulder of a passing dancer. "Excuse me, sir. I really need—" His words cut off abruptly as the man turned. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was nothing. Just smooth, unbroken skin. Jack stumbled backward, a scream caught in his throat. "What the hell?" As if his outburst had broken some spell, the music screeched to a halt. Every dancer in the clearing froze mid-step, then slowly, in perfect unison, turned to face Jack. Panic exploded in his chest. Jack spun around, intent on fleeing back into the forest. But where there had been an opening just moments ago, the trees now stood densely packed, forming an impenetrable wall. "No, no, no," Jack gasped, frantically searching for an escape route. "This can't be happening. This isn't real." Behind him, he heard the soft rustle of fabric. Jack turned back to the clearing, his heart nearly stopping at what he saw. The faceless figures had begun to approach, their arms outstretched in a silent, terrifying invitation to join them. "Stay back," Jack yelled, pressing himself against the trees. "Don't come any closer." But the dancers paid no heed to his words. They moved inexorably forward, their smooth faces reflecting the lantern light in a way that made them seem to glow from within. As the first cold, smooth hand brushed against his arm, Jack knew with sickening certainty that his night of terror was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. Jack's heart pounded frantically as the faceless figures closed in around him. Their graceful movements now seemed sinister, each step bringing them closer with inhuman precision. He pressed himself against the trees, feeling the rough bark dig into his back. "Please," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The dancers gave no response, their smooth, featureless faces betraying no emotion. The eerie music had started again, its cheerful tune a stark contrast to the horror unfolding in the clearing. As a cold, smooth hand grasped his arm, Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He jerked away, ducking under the outstretched arms of the nearest figures. "Get away from me," he shouted, stumbling towards the center of the clearing. "Someone help! Anyone!" But his cries echoed unanswered through the forest. The dancers turned as one, their movements fluid and unhurried but inexorable. Jack spun in a circle, desperately searching for an escape route, but found himself surrounded on all sides. A thought struck him and he fumbled for his phone. Come on," he muttered, his fingers shaking as he tried to dial 911. But the screen remained stubbornly dark, the battery completely drained. "No," Jack cried, hurling the useless device at the nearest dancer. It passed harmlessly through the figure as if it were made of smoke. Panic threatened to overwhelm him as the circle of dancers tightened. Jack could feel the unnatural chill emanating from their bodies, see the way the lantern light seemed to bend strangely around them. "This isn't real," he told himself, squeezing his eyes shut. It's just a bad dream. Wake up, Jack. Wake up. But when he opened his eyes, the nightmarish scene remained. And now, the closest dancer was reaching for him, its fingers inches from his face. In a burst of desperate energy, Jack dove between two of the figures, feeling an icy cold wash over him as he passed through their incorporeal forms. He hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet and sprinting towards the edge of the clearing. "Help!" he screamed as he ran. "Somebody help me!" But his foot caught on an unseen root, sending him sprawling. Jack's head struck something hard, and for a moment stars exploded behind his eyes. As he lay there, dazed and gasping for breath, he felt cold hands grasping his arms, lifting him to his feet. The world spun around him as he was turned to face the center of the clearing. "No," Jack moaned, trying weakly to resist. "Please no." But his protests fell on deaf ears, or rather on beings with no ears at all. The dancers began to move, pulling Jack along with them. To his horror, he found his feet moving of their own accord, falling into step with the eerie rhythm. "What's happening to me?" he gasped, feeling a strange numbness spreading through his body. As Jack was drawn deeper into the dance, he caught sight of his reflection in one of the hanging lanterns. His blood ran cold. Where his face had been, there was now only smooth, featureless skin. A silent scream built in Jack's throat as he realized the truth. He wasn't just joining the dance, he was becoming one of them. The music swelled, drowning out Jack's final, desperate thoughts as he was absorbed into the eternal waltz. In the lantern-lit clearing, the dance continued, with one more faceless figure now moving in perfect, haunting synchronicity. And in the depths of the forest, a new sound began. Distant, cheerful music, beckoning the next lost soul to join the dance. Jack's consciousness swirled in a haze of confusion and terror. He could feel his body moving, twirling and stepping in perfect time with the otherworldly music, but he had no control over his actions. It was as if he were a puppet, his strings pulled by some unseen malevolent force. "Help!" He tried to cry out, but no sound escaped his now featureless face. "Someone, please help me." But his pleas remained unheard, trapped within the prison of his own mind. Around him, the other dancers continued their relentless waltz, their smooth faces betraying no hint of the horror they might be experiencing. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the lantern-lit clearing. Had it been hours? Days? Years? Jack couldn't tell. The dance went on and on without pause or respite. In rare moments of clarity, Jack would catch glimpses of new arrivals at the edge of the clearing, lost hikers, drawn by the cheerful music just as he had been. He wanted to scream at them, to warn them away, but his body continued its mechanical dance, ignoring his desperate mental commands. One night, or perhaps it was day, for the light in the clearing never changed, a young woman stumbled into their midst. Her eyes widened in terror as she took in the scene before her. "Oh my God!" she gasped, her voice cutting through the music. "What is this place? Who are you people?" Jack felt a surge of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe she could escape, get help, end this nightmare. But even as the thought formed, he felt his body turning towards her, arms outstretched in that terrible, silent invitation. He saw the moment realization dawned in her eyes, saw her turn to flee, only to find her path blocked by the suddenly dense forest. "No!" she screamed, backing away. "Stay away from me!" Jack's heart broke as he watched the scene play out, powerless to intervene. The dancers encircled her, their cold hands grasping at her clothes, her hair, her skin. He saw the terror in her eyes slowly fade to confusion, then to blankness as her features smoothed away. And then she was dancing too, another faceless figure in their never-ending waltz. As the dance continued, Jack began to notice subtle changes. Sometimes he could almost feel emotions emanating from the other dancers, flickers of fear, sadness, resignation. He wondered if they were trying to communicate, to reach out to one another in the only way they could. Jack focused all his mental energy on projecting his thoughts outward. "Can anyone hear me? Is there a way out of this? To his shock, he felt a response, not in words, but in a wave of empathy and shared sorrow. They could hear him. They were trapped, just like him. This realization brought both comfort and despair. He wasn't alone in his suffering, but that meant there might truly be no escape. As the night wore on, Jack's thoughts turned to the life he'd left behind. Would anyone come looking for him? Would they ever discover what had happened? He thought of his family, his friends, the future he'd planned. All of it was gone now, replaced by this eternal, haunting dance. But as dawn broke over the forest, bringing no change to the lantern-lit clearing, a small spark of determination ignited in Jack's mind. There had to be a way out. There had to be a reason for all of this. And somehow, some way, he was going to find it. Even if it took an eternity of dancing to do so. Days blended into nights, and nights into days, as Jack continued his endless dance in the lantern-lit clearing. The initial panic had given way to a numbing despair, but beneath it all, a tiny ember of hope still flickered. As he twirled and stepped in perfect synchronicity with the other faceless dancers, Jack focused all his mental energy on finding a way to communicate. He'd felt that spark of connection before, and he was determined to explore it further. Can anyone hear me? He projected his thoughts outward, imagining them as tendrils of light reaching towards the other dancers. Please, if you can understand me, give me a sign. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the endless music and the rhythmic movement of bodies. But then, just as Jack was about to give up, he felt it, a whisper of a thought not his own. Hear you. The shock of it almost broke Jack's stride, but his body continued its relentless dance even as his mind reeled. Yes, he thought back frantically. Yes, I can hear you. Who are you? Do you know what's happening to us? The response came slowly, as if the other dancer was struggling to form the thoughts. Emma. Lost. So long. Jack's heart raced with excitement and hope. Emma, I'm Jack. I'm going to try to help us, okay? Do you know anything about this curse? There was a long pause, and Jack feared he'd lost the connection. But then, ancient, guardian, forest. Before Jack could process this cryptic message, he felt another presence brush against his mind. Then another, and another. Suddenly he was awash in a sea of silent voices, all clamoring to be heard. Trapped for centuries, tried to escape, no way out. The music never stops. The cacophony of thoughts threatened to overwhelm Jack, but he clung to his determination. Please, he projected as strongly as he could. One at a time. We need to work together if we're going to figure this out. Gradually, the mental voices quieted, leaving only Emma's presence strong in Jack's mind. Emma, he thought. You mentioned a guardian. What did you mean? Protector of the forest, came the halting reply. Cursed to punish intruder. Jack's mind raced. A curse to punish intruders, but why? And how could it be broken? As if sensing his questions, Emma's thoughts continued. Lanterns, key, but dangerous. Suddenly, Jack felt a shift in the air. The music, which had been a constant backdrop to their eternal dance, faltered for just a moment. In that brief pause, Jack felt a surge of energy from the other dancers. Fear, hope, desperation, all mingled together. And then, as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. The music resumed its cheerful melody, and the dancers continued their endless waltz. But something had changed. Jack could feel it in the way the other dancers moved, in the thoughts that now flowed more freely between them. That tiny break in the music had given them all a glimmer of hope. We can beat this, Jack thought fiercely, projecting his determination to all who could hear. Together we can find a way to break this curse. As the night wore on, Jack's mind buzzed with newfound purpose. The lanterns, Emma had said, were key. But key to what? And what made them dangerous? He knew the path ahead would be difficult and fraught with peril. But for the first time since he'd entered this nightmarish clearing, Jack felt something he'd thought was lost forever. He felt hope. As the eternal dance continued, Jack found himself growing more adept at communicating with the other dancers. Their silent conversations became clearer, more coherent, as they shared their stories and what little they knew about their shared predicament. Emma's voice came through the strongest. "Jack?" Her thoughts reached out to him. "I've been here the longest. I've seen so many come and go." "Go?" Jack's mental voice was tinged with hope. "You mean some have escaped?" A wave of sadness washed over him from Emma. "Not escaped, faded. After enough time, some just disappear." The implications chilled Jack to his core. He redoubled his efforts to unravel the mystery of their curse. "Emma, you mentioned a guardian before. Can you tell me more?" Her response came slowly, as if she were sifting through ancient memories. "Long ago, this forest was sacred. The guardian was its protector, but humans came, desecrating the land. The guardian's anger, it changed everything." As Emma's story unfolded in his mind, Jack saw flashes of the past: pristine forests, native tribes treating the land with reverence, and then the arrival of settlers, clear-cutting and exploiting. "The curse," Jack thought. "It's a punishment?" "Yes," Emma replied. "A eternal dance for those who disrespect the forest. But it's gone too far. The Guardian's rage has twisted the magic. Now any who enter are at risk." Jack felt a surge of determination. There has to be a way to break it. "You mentioned the lanterns." Suddenly another voice broke into their conversation. "The lanterns are dangerous." The mental voice was filled with panic. I tried to use them." "Who are you?" Jack asked. "Thomas. I've been here for, I don't know how long, but I discovered something about the lanterns. They're connected to the curse somehow." Jack's excitement grew. "How? What did you find out?" Thomas's thoughts were tinged with regret. "If you extinguish one, it breaks the rhythm of the dance. But the consequences..." His voice trailed off, leaving Jack frustrated. "What consequences? Thomas, what happened?" But Thomas had retreated, his presence fading from the mental link. Emma's voice returned, gentle but urgent. "Be careful, Jack. The Guardian's magic is powerful and unpredictable. Many have tried to break the curse. All have failed." Jack's thoughts whirled with this new information. The lanterns were key, but also dangerous. The Guardian's anger had created this nightmare, but perhaps understanding its origin could lead to a solution. As he pondered these revelations, Jack noticed something strange. One of the dancers near him seemed to be moving slightly out of sync with the others. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but to Jack's heightened awareness it stood out like a beacon. "Emma," he called out mentally. "Do you see that? The dancer to my left?" There was a pause before Emma replied, her mental voice filled with awe. I've never seen anything like that before. How is it possible?" Jack focused all his attention on the anomalous dancer, trying to establish a connection. "Hello? Can you hear me? What's your name?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then faintly a new voice entered the mental link. "Help. Me." The voice was weak, but there was something different about it. Something more human. With a jolt of shock, Jack realized the truth. This dancer wasn't fully transformed. Somehow they were resisting the curse. As this realization dawned, Jack felt a shift in the air. The cheerful music took on a menacing undertone, and the lanterns flickered ominously. Something had changed. The Guardian was aware of their discovery, and it wasn't happy. The clearing crackled with an unseen energy as Jack focused his attention on the struggling dancer. The cheerful music had taken on a discordant edge, the notes clashing in a way that set Jack's nerves on edge. "Can you hear me?" Jack projected his thoughts towards the anomalous figure. "What's your name? How are you resisting?" The response came in broken fragments like a badly tuned radio. Lily. I'm Lily. Don't know how. Just keep fighting. Jack could feel the strain in Lily's mental voice, the effort it took for her to maintain even this small degree of independence. He reached out to Emma and the others, his thoughts tinged with urgency. Everyone, focus on Lily. Maybe if we all concentrate, we can help her break free. A chorus of mental voices responded, some eager, others hesitant. Jack could feel their collective consciousness converging on Lily, lending her strength. Slowly, painfully, Lily's movements began to change. Her steps faltered, her turns became less precise. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she stumbled. The music screeched to a halt. In the sudden silence, Lily's voice rang out, hoarse but triumphant. I can speak. The other dancers froze in place, their faceless heads turning towards Lily in perfect unison. Jack felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. Hope, fear, excitement, dread. Before anyone could react further, a low rumble shook the clearing. The trees at the edge began to sway and twist, their branches elongating into grasping tendrils. A voice, ancient and furious, echoed through the forest. Who dares defy the dance? Lily stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. No, please. I didn't mean to. But the Guardian wasn't listening. A massive shape began to coalesce from the shadows between the trees, a figure of bark and leaf, moss and stone. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light as it advanced on Lily. Jack fought against the paralysis that held him, desperately trying to move to help. Leave her alone, he shouted in his mind, hoping the Guardian could hear him. To his surprise, the giant figure paused, its glowing gaze sweeping across the frozen dancers. You all wish to defy me? It boomed, its voice shaking the very ground. In that moment, Jack made a decision. Using every ounce of mental strength he possessed, he pushed against the curse that held him. He felt something crack, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. And then miraculously, he moved. It wasn't much, just a small step forward. But it was enough. The Guardian's attention snapped to him, its eyes narrowing. So, it rumbled. The interlopers think they can break my curse. You know not what forces you tamper with, mortals. Jack stood his ground, even as fear threatened to overwhelm him. We know enough, he said, his voice shaky but determined. This curse, it's gone too far. You're punishing innocent people now, not just those who harmed the forest. The Guardian tilted its head, a gesture eerily human on its inhuman face. And what would you have me do? Release you all so you can return to your destructive ways? No, Jack replied, an idea forming in his mind. But maybe there's another way. A way we can make amends, protect the forest, without this eternal dance. The Guardian was silent for a long moment, its ancient eyes boring into Jack. Then slowly, it nodded. Speak your proposal, mortal. But know this. If I find it wanting, your fate will be far worse than an eternal dance. As Jack opened his mouth to respond, he felt the weight of countless hopes resting on his shoulders. Whatever he said next could mean freedom or doom, not just for him, but for all the trapped dancers. The fate of the forest, and perhaps the world beyond, hung in the balance. Jack's mind raced as he faced the towering Guardian. The fate of everyone in the clearing rested on his next words. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Guardian of the forest, Jack began, his voice growing stronger with each word. We understand your anger. The destruction of your realm was unforgivable. But this curse, it's no longer serving its purpose. It's trapping innocent people, those who meant no harm to your forest. The Guardian's eyes narrowed, but it remained silent, allowing Jack to continue. I propose a new pact, Jack said. Release us from this eternal dance, and in return, we'll become the protectors of your forest. We'll dedicate our lives to preserving this land, educating others about its importance and preventing further destruction. A low rumble emanated from the Guardian, like distant thunder. Pretty words, mortal. But how can I trust that you'll keep this promise once you're free? Lily stepped forward, her legs shaky but her voice firm. Bind us to it, she said, not with a curse, but with a sacred oath, one that connects us to the forest, so we can never forget our promise. The Guardian considered this, its massive form shifting like trees in a strong wind. And what of those who came before you, those who have faded away? Jack felt a pang of sadness. We can't undo what's been done, he admitted, but we can honor their memory by protecting what they loved, this forest. Emma's voice suddenly rang out, startling everyone. She had broken free of the paralysis as well. I've been here the longest, she said. I've seen the forest change, seen the damage done, but I've also seen its resilience, its beauty. I swear to you, Guardian, I will spend the rest of my days ensuring it thrives. One by one, other dancers began to move, to speak. Their voices joined in a chorus of commitment, each pledging to protect the forest in their own way. The Guardian was silent for a long moment, its ancient eyes scanning the faces of the dancers. Finally, it spoke. Very well, it rumbled. I will accept your bargain, but know this. The oath you swear will be binding. Break it, and the consequences will be dire. The Guardian raised its massive arms, and the clearing filled with a soft, green light. Jack felt a warmth spreading through him, a connection to the earth beneath his feet, to the trees around him. Repeat after me, the Guardian intoned. I swear to protect this forest, to nurture its growth, and to preserve its sanctity. My life is bound to these woods, my purpose aligned with nature's will. One by one, the dancers repeated the oath. As each spoke the words, the featureless mask they had worn for so long melted away, revealing their true faces. When the last dancer had sworn the oath, the Guardian nodded solemnly. It is done, it said. You are now the guardians of this realm, bound to it by your own will and words. The ethereal music that had haunted the clearing for so long faded away, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, a distant stream. Jack looked around at the faces of his fellow dancers, now fellow guardians. They were free, but their journey was far from over. What now? Lily asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Jack squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of their new responsibility. Now, he said, we begin our real work. We have a forest to protect and a world to educate. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the new guardians of the forest set out on their mission. The curse of the eternal dance was broken, but their connection to the forest would last a lifetime, and beyond. The clearing, once a place of fear and despair, now stood as a symbol of redemption and hope. And as the guardians dispersed into the woods, each carrying the sacred oath in their hearts, they knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. Months had passed since the breaking of the curse, and the forest was alive with change. Jack stood at the edge of the clearing, now transformed into a vibrant hub of activity. Where once there had been only the eerie glow of enchanted lanterns, now sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground with warm patterns. Jack! Emma's voice called out from nearby. The new saplings are taking root beautifully. I think we're finally making progress in the areas that were overlogged. Jack smiled, watching as Emma expertly tended to a row of young trees. That's fantastic news. How are the others doing with their tasks? Emma wiped her brow, her eyes bright with purpose. Lily's group is making headway with the local authorities. They're close to getting this entire area declared a protected zone. As if summoned by her name, Lily emerged from the tree line, a tablet in hand. Speaking of which, she said, approaching Jack and Emma, we've got a meeting with the county officials next week. They want to discuss implementing an educational program about forest conservation. Jack nodded approvingly. Perfect. That's exactly the kind of outreach we need. A rustle in the underbrush announced the arrival of Thomas, his arms full of various plants and herbs. "You won't believe what I've discovered," he said excitedly. "Some of these plants have medicinal properties we never knew about. I've been working with a pharmaceutical company to develop new treatments, with the agreement that a portion of any profits goes back into forest preservation." "That's brilliant, Thomas," Jack said, clapping him on the shoulder. "It's this kind of innovation that will help us protect the forest in the long term." As they talked, more of the former dancers turned guardians gathered around, each with updates on their various projects. The air buzzed with energy and purpose, a far cry from the haunting silence of their cursed days. Suddenly, a hush fell over the group. The massive form of the forest guardian materialized at the edge of the clearing, its ancient eyes surveying the scene before it. Jack stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. "Guardian," he said respectfully, "we've made great strides in fulfilling our oath. The forest is healthier than it's been in decades." The Guardian's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Indeed, mortal. You and your companions have surprised me with your dedication, but do not grow complacent. The threats to this realm are ever present." Lily spoke up, her voice firm. "We're aware of the challenges, Guardian, but we're also growing stronger and more knowledgeable every day. We won't let you down." The Guardian's form shifted, branches and leaves rustling. "See that you don't. Remember, your fates are now intertwined with this forest. Its flourishing is your flourishing. Its suffering, your suffering." With those words, the Guardian faded back into the trees, leaving behind a contemplative silence. Emma was the first to break it. "He's right, you know. We can't afford to become complacent." Jack nodded, his expression determined. "Agreed, which is why I've been thinking, it's time we expanded our efforts beyond just this forest." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, curiosity piqued. "I mean," Jack said, his eyes scanning the faces of his fellow guardians, "that there are other forests out there, other natural spaces in need of protection. What if we could share what we've learned here, train others to become guardians in their own right?" A murmur of excitement rippled through the group. Lily's eyes lit up. A network of guardians, all working together to protect nature across the country. Across the world even. "Jack, that's brilliant." "It won't be easy," Jack cautioned. "We'll be up against powerful interests, ingrained habits. But if we've learned anything from our time here, it's that seemingly impossible changes can happen when people come together with a common purpose." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, the Guardians huddled together, excitedly discussing plans for this new, ambitious phase of their mission. The curse that had once trapped them had become a blessing, not just for this forest, but potentially for ecosystems around the globe. And as night fell, the forest seemed to hum with renewed energy, as if sensing the magnitude of the Guardians' new commitment. The journey that had begun with an eternal, haunting dance was evolving into a worldwide symphony of conservation and hope. 5 years had passed since the Guardians had begun their mission to expand their efforts beyond their own forest. Jack stood atop a hill, overlooking a vast expanse of green that stretched as far as the eye could see. This wasn't his original forest, but a new one, thousands of miles away, that had been on the brink of destruction before the Guardians intervened. "It's breathtaking, isn't it?" Lily said, joining him on the hilltop. "Hard to believe this was almost a shopping mall complex a few years ago." Jack nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Emma emerged from the tree line, followed by a group of eager-looking individuals. "Jack, Lily," Emma called out, "I'd like you to meet our newest recruits. They've just completed their training and are ready to take their oath." Jack turned to face the group, his expression warm but serious. "Welcome, all of you. You're about to embark on a journey that will change your lives forever. Are you ready for the responsibility that comes with being a guardian?" A young woman stepped forward, her eyes bright with determination. We are, sir. We've seen the difference you've made here and in other forests around the world. We want to be part of that change. Lily smiled. That's good to hear because the work is never done. There's always another forest to save, another ecosystem to protect. As if on cue, Thomas appeared, looking slightly out of breath. Speaking of which, he said, holding up a tablet, we've just received an urgent message from our team in the Amazon. The situation there is escalating faster than we anticipated. Jack's brow furrowed with concern. What's happening? Thomas quickly pulled up a map on his tablet. Illegal logging operations have increased dramatically in the past month. Our local guardians are overwhelmed. They're requesting immediate backup. Jack exchanged glances with Lily and Emma. They had faced challenges like this before, but the Amazon was on a scale unlike anything they'd encountered. All right, Jack said, his voice filled with resolve. Emma, can you handle the oath ceremony for our new recruits? Emma nodded. Of course. What are you thinking, Jack? Lily, Thomas, and I will head to the Amazon immediately. We'll assess the situation and coordinate with our team there. Emma, once you're done here, I need you to reach out to our contacts in the international community. We're going to need political pressure to back up our efforts on the ground. The group sprang into action, years of working together making their movements fluid and efficient. As Jack, Lily, and Thomas prepared for their journey, one of the new recruits approached Jack hesitantly. Sir, she said, her voice a mix of awe and nervousness. I've heard stories about how you and the others became guardians. Is it true that you were once cursed to dance eternally in a forest? Jack paused, memories of those dark days flooding back. He smiled softly. It's true. What began as a curse became our greatest blessing. It taught us the true value of nature and the power we have to make a difference. He placed a hand on the young recruit's shoulder. Remember that as you begin your own journey as a guardian. Every challenge is an opportunity. Every setback can lead to a greater comeback. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest, Jack felt a familiar surge of determination. The work ahead would be difficult, perhaps their greatest challenge yet. But as he looked at the faces of his fellow guardians, both old and new, he knew they were ready. All right, team, he said, his voice carrying across the hilltop. We've got a rainforest to save. Let's show the world what guardians can do. With a chorus of agreement, the guardians dispersed, each heading off to their respective missions. As Jack prepared for the long journey to the Amazon, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From trapped dancers to global conservationists, their path had been unprecedented. And yet, he knew, their greatest adventures still lay ahead. The humid air clung to Jack's skin as he pushed through the dense undergrowth of the Amazon rainforest. Lily and Thomas flanked him, their faces etched with determination. They had been trekking for days, guided by their local team to the epicenter of the illegal logging operations. We should be approaching the main camp soon, whispered Maria, their Brazilian guide and fellow guardian. Be prepared for anything. These loggers are not known for their hospitality. As they crested a small rise, the group froze. Below them, a vast clearing scarred the forest. Heavy machinery stood silent in the fading light, surrounded by stacks of felled trees. My God, Thomas breathed. The satellite images didn't do it justice. This is devastating, Lily finished, her voice tight with emotion. Jack's jaw clenched. This ends now. Maria, where's the nearest Guardian outpost? Maria consulted her GPS. About 5 kilometers east. We've been gathering evidence and building a case against the logging company, but they always seem one step ahead. Then we need to change the game, Jack said, his mind racing. Thomas, remember that plant you discovered back home? The one with extraordinary regenerative properties? Thomas nodded, realization dawning on his face. You think it could work here? It's worth a shot, Jack replied. Lily, I need you to contact Emma. Tell her to expedite the international pressure. We need to buy ourselves some time. As Lily began tapping furiously on her satellite phone, a twig snapped nearby. The The group tensed, hands instinctively reaching for their gear. "Well, well," a gruff voice called out. "Looks like we have some tree huggers lost in our neck of the woods." A group of armed men emerged from the shadows, their leader a tall, scarred individual with cold eyes. "We're not lost," Jack said calmly, stepping forward. "We're exactly where we need to be." The leader chuckled mirthlessly. "Is that so? And where might that be?" "Standing between you and the destruction of one of the world's most vital ecosystems," Jack replied, his voice carrying across the clearing. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, unexpectedly, a low rumble began to build. The ground trembled beneath their feet. "What the?" the leader began, but his words were cut short as massive roots erupted from the earth, twisting and writhing like living tentacles. Jack's eyes widened in recognition. "The Guardian," he whispered. As if summoned by his words, a colossal figure began to take shape amidst the chaos. It was like their forest guardian back home, but different, wilder, more primal. Its form shimmered with the countless species of the Amazon, from jaguars to poisoned dart frogs to brilliant macaws. The loggers stumbled back in terror, their weapons forgotten. The Amazon Guardian's voice boomed across the clearing, ancient and powerful. "Who dares threaten the heart of the world?" Jack stepped forward, bowing his head in respect. "Great Guardian of the Amazon, we are the protectors you called. We've come to help heal the wounds inflicted on your realm." The Guardian's gaze settled on Jack and his companions. "I have watched you, distant kin. Your dedication is noted, but this fight is beyond even your abilities." "Perhaps alone," Lily interjected, finding her voice. "But we're not alone. We represent a growing network of guardians around the world, and we bring knowledge that could help restore what's been lost." Thomas held up a small vial. "This contains seeds imbued with regenerative properties unlike anything in nature. With your blessing, we believe we can accelerate the forest's healing." The Guardian was silent for a long moment, its ancient eyes unreadable. Finally, it spoke again. "Your offer is accepted, but know this: the task ahead is monumental. The wounds run deep, and the enemies of the forest are numerous." Jack nodded solemnly. "We understand, and we're ready for the challenge." As the Guardian's form began to fade back into the forest, Jack turned to face the awestruck loggers. "You have a choice to make," he said. "Continue down this path of destruction, or join us in becoming part of the solution. What will it be?" The leader of the loggers, his earlier bravado gone, looked at Jack with a mix of fear and grudging respect. I think we need to talk." As night fell over the Amazon, Jack and his team began the arduous task of negotiation and education. They knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but with the Guardian's blessing and their worldwide network of protectors, they had hope. The battle for the heart of the Amazon had only just begun, but already, the tide was turning. And in the depths of the forest, new life was stirring, ready to flourish under the watchful eyes of its newly empowered guardians. A year had passed since the confrontation in the Amazon, and the world was changing. Jack stood before a massive screen in the newly established Guardian Coordination Center, watching as green dots flickered to life across a global map. "Another successful conversion in Indonesia," Lily announced, entering the room with a tablet in hand. "That's the 5th logging company this month to join our sustainable forestry initiative." Jack nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "It's incredible how far we've come, but we can't let our guard down. There's still so much work to do." As if on cue, Emma's face appeared on one of the smaller screens. "Jack, Lily, we've got a situation developing in Borneo. Our team there has uncovered a massive palm oil operation that's about to clear thousands of acres of pristine rainforest." "Not if we have anything to say about it," Jack replied, his jaw set with determination. "What resources do we have in the area?" Thomas joined the conversation, pulling up a holographic display of Borneo. "We've got a small team of guardians on the ground, led by Amir. They've been working with local communities to establish protected areas, but this new threat is beyond their current capabilities. Jack's mind raced, formulating a plan. All right, here's what we're going to do. Lily, I need you to reach out to our corporate partners. See if we can put economic pressure on this palm oil company. Emma, coordinate with our legal team. We need to challenge any permits they might have obtained. On it. Lily and Emma replied in unison, before their screens winked out. Thomas, Jack continued, get in touch with Amir. Tell him to start the emergency propagation protocol. We need to create a living barrier around the threatened area. As Thomas hurried off to relay the instructions, Jack felt a familiar presence enter the room. He turned to see Maria, the Brazilian guardian who had been with them in the Amazon. Jack, she said, her eyes shining with excitement, you need to see this. She pulled up a series of images on the main screen. They showed the area of the Amazon that had been devastated by logging a year ago. But instead of a barren wasteland, the images revealed a lush, thriving forest. The regenerative seeds, Jack breathed. They worked even better than we hoped. Maria nodded. And not just there. We've been tracking the spread of the enhanced flora. It's rewriting the rules of ecological recovery. Forests that would have taken centuries to regrow are bouncing back in months. As Jack marveled at the images, a soft chime announced an incoming call. The screen shifted to reveal the face of the logging company leader they had confronted in the Amazon. Jack, the man said, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. We've been thinking about what you said, about being part of the solution. My team and we want to help. We've got skills, equipment. Tell us how we can make a difference. Jack felt a surge of emotion. This was what they had been working towards, not just stopping destruction, but changing hearts and minds. Thank you, he said sincerely. Your help could be invaluable. We'll be in touch with specific assignments soon. As the call ended, Jack turned to Maria. Spread the word to all our teams. I want everyone to know about this. It's not just about fighting against something anymore. We're building a global movement, a symphony of renewal. Maria nodded, her eyes gleaming. A symphony indeed. And it's growing louder every day. As night fell, Jack stood by the window of the coordination center, looking out at the stars. He thought back to the cursed dance that had started it all, how a punishment had transformed into a global mission of hope. The Guardian's words echoed in his mind. Your fates are now intertwined with this forest. Its flourishing is your flourishing. Its suffering, your suffering. But now it wasn't just one forest. It was the entire world. And as the green dots on the global map continued to multiply, Jack knew that they were witnessing the birth of a new era, an era where humanity and nature moved in harmony, dancing to the rhythm of life itself. The eternal waltz had become a worldwide ballet of restoration, and its music was only growing stronger. 5 years had passed since the Guardian Coordination Center was established. The world had witnessed unprecedented environmental recovery, but with success came new challenges. Jack stood before the assembled Guardians, his face etched with concern. Friends, he began, his voice carrying across the crowded auditorium. We've achieved more than we ever dreamed possible, but we face a new threat, one that comes not from destruction, but from our own success. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lily stepped forward, her brow furrowed. What do you mean, Jack? Jack gestured to the large screen behind him, which displayed a series of complex graphs and charts. The accelerated forest growth we've championed is having unforeseen consequences. In some regions, it's disrupting established ecosystems. We're seeing imbalances in wildlife populations, changes in weather patterns, and in some cases, conflicts with human settlements. Thomas stood up, his face pale. Are you saying our efforts to heal the planet are causing harm? Not exactly, Jack replied, his voice steady. We're healing, but perhaps too quickly. Nature has its own pace, and we may have pushed it too far in our eagerness to repair the damage. Emma's voice came through the speakers, joining remotely from a field site. I've observed similar issues in my region. The rapid forest expansion is encroaching on agricultural lands. Local communities are growing concerned. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Years of hard work and dedication suddenly seemed to teeter on the edge of a precipice. Amir, the guardian from Borneo, spoke up. So what do? We can't just stop our efforts. Jack nodded solemnly. No, we can't. But we need to adapt. We need to find a balance between rapid recovery and sustainable growth. Lily's eyes lit up with an idea. What if we could modulate the effects of the regenerative seeds, adjust their potency based on local conditions? That's brilliant, Lily, Thomas exclaimed. I could work on developing a variable formula. We could create a spectrum of regenerative effects. As the Guardians began to brainstorm solutions, a deep, familiar rumble shook the building. The massive form of their original forest guardian materialized at the back of the auditorium. Guardians, its voice boomed, silencing all other conversation. You have learned much, but there is still more to understand. Jack stepped towards the Guardian, bowing his head in respect. We're listening. What wisdom can you share with us? The Guardian's eyes, ancient and knowing, swept across the room. The balance you seek is not found in control, but in harmony. You must learn to dance with nature, not lead it. Maria, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. The dance, Jack, do you remember? The eternal waltz that once trapped us? Realization dawned on Jack's face. Of course. The curse wasn't just punishment, it was a lesson. A lesson in moving in perfect synchronization with the rhythms of nature. The Guardian nodded, a gesture that sent shivers through the assembly. You begin to understand. Your task now is to apply this wisdom on a global scale. As the Guardian faded away, the room erupted in excited discussion. Jack raised his hands, calling for attention. All right, everyone, we have our mission. We need to develop a new approach, one that respects the natural rhythms of each ecosystem we're trying to heal. It won't be easy, but I believe we're up to the challenge. Lily stepped up beside him, her eyes shining with determination. We'll need to retrain all our Guardians, adjust our technologies, and completely rethink our strategies. And we'll do it, Jack affirmed, because that's what Guardians do. We adapt, we learn, and we keep moving forward. As the meeting adjourned and the Guardians dispersed to begin their new tasks, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. They had faced challenges before, but this was different. This wasn't just about saving the planet anymore. It was about learning to truly live in harmony with it. The Eternal Waltz was evolving once again, and Jack knew that its most beautiful movements were yet to come. 2 years had passed since the Guardians had recognized the need for a more balanced approach to their global restoration efforts. The Guardian Coordination Center hummed with activity as Jack entered, his eyes immediately drawn to the central holographic display. Status report, he called out, and the room fell into a focused silence. Lily stepped forward, manipulating the hologram to zoom in on various regions. The Harmony Protocol is showing promising results, Jack. We're seeing a 60% reduction in ecosystem disruptions compared to last year. Thomas chimed in from his workstation. The variable regeneration formulas are performing exceptionally well. We can now tailor the growth rate to each specific ecosystem's needs. Jack nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Excellent work, everyone. But let's not get complacent. Emma, how are things looking on the ground? Emma's face appeared on a nearby screen, her expression thoughtful. Overall, positive. Local communities are much more receptive to our efforts now that we're not overwhelming their lands with rapid forest growth. However, we're facing a new challenge in the Arctic. The hologram shifted to display the northern polar region. Jack frowned, noting the unusual patterns of ice formation. What are we looking at, Emma? The accelerated forest growth in subarctic regions is altering weather patterns. We're seeing unexpected ice formation in some areas and rapid melting in others. It's throwing the entire polar ecosystem out of balance. A heavy silence fell over the room. The Arctic had always been a delicate system. and now their efforts to heal the planet were inadvertently threatening it. Amir spoke up, his voice filled with determination. We need to adapt the Harmony Protocol for polar conditions. Perhaps we could develop a cold-resistant variant of our regenerative flora? Good thinking, Amir, Jack said. Thomas, can you work with Amir on that? And Lily, I need you to coordinate with our Arctic teams. We need to slow down our efforts there until we have a better solution. As the team sprang into action, a soft chime announced an incoming transmission. The main screen lit up to reveal a face Jack hadn't seen in years, the forest guardian from the Amazon. Guardians, the ancient being intoned, its voice resonating with power. Your efforts have not gone unnoticed. The spirit of the earth stirs. Jack stepped forward, bowing his head in respect. Great Guardian, we're honored by your presence. What do you mean the spirit of the earth stirs? The Guardian's form shimmered as if struggling to maintain its connection. The balance you seek, it awakens something long dormant. Prepare yourselves. The dance is changing. Before anyone could ask for clarification, the transmission cut out. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Jack, Lily said, her voice tinged with awe and a hint of fear. What do you think it meant? Jack shook his head, his mind racing. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling our work is about to enter a new phase, one we might not be fully prepared for. Maria, who had been quietly analyzing data in the corner, suddenly gasped. Everyone, look at this. She projected her findings onto the main hologram. The display showed a global view of ley lines, theoretical pathways of natural energy flow around the Earth. But these weren't theoretical anymore. Faint lines of blue-green energy pulsed across the globe, growing stronger by the second. It's as if, Maria breathed, the Earth itself is waking up. Jack stared at the display, a mix of excitement and trepidation washing over him. The eternal waltz, he murmured. It's not just us dancing anymore. The whole planet is joining in. As the Guardians watched in awe, the pulsing lines grew brighter, forming intricate patterns across the face of the Earth. They stood on the brink of something monumental, something that would change their understanding of the world and their role in it forever. The next movement in their global dance was beginning, and it promised to be the most challenging and beautiful yet. The Guardian Coordination Center had been transformed into a hive of frenetic activity. Screens flickered with real-time data from around the globe, showing the pulsing ley lines growing stronger by the hour. Jack stood at the center of it all, his face a mask of concentration as he coordinated efforts worldwide. Lily, what's the status on the Antarctic Research Station? Jack called out, his voice cutting through the din. Lily's fingers flew across her holographic interface. They're reporting unprecedented ice melt, Jack. But it's not just melting. The ice is transforming, crystallizing into new structures. Before Jack could respond, Thomas burst into the room, his lab coat askew and his eyes wild with excitement. You're not going to believe this, he panted. The regenerative flora, it's evolving, rapidly. We're seeing new species appear overnight, perfectly adapted to their environments. A hush fell over the room as the implications sank in. Emma's voice crackled through the speakers, breaking the silence. It's not just happening in the forests. Ocean temperatures are fluctuating, creating new currents. Marine life is adapting at an alarming rate. It's as if the entire planet is reorganizing itself, Jack finished, his voice filled with awe. Suddenly, the main screen flared to life. The image of the Amazon Guardian appeared, but this time, it wasn't alone. Alongside it were other ancient beings, guardians of mountains, oceans, deserts, and more. The Amazon Guardian spoke, its voice resonating with power. Guardians of humanity, the time has come. The spirit of Gaia awakens. Jack stepped forward, his heart pounding. Great Guardians, what's happening? How can we help? The Mountain Guardian, its form reminiscent of craggy peaks, rumbled in response. Your efforts have rekindled the Earth's own healing abilities, but with awakening comes growing pains. The planet seeks a new balance, and the process may be tumultuous. As if to underscore its words, the building shook with a sudden tremor. Alarms blared as new data flooded the screens. Earthquake swarms worldwide, Amir reported, his voice tense. Volcanic activity spiking in the ring of fire. The Ocean Guardian, its form fluid and ever-changing, spoke next. The seas rise and fall in new patterns. Islands will sink, new lands will emerge. This is the way of renewal. Maria's voice cut through the chaos. Jack, we're receiving reports from every corner of the globe. People are panicking. Governments are mobilizing for natural disasters on an unprecedented scale. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, his gaze was steely with determination. All right, listen up, everyone. This is what we've been preparing for, even if we didn't know it. Our job now is twofold: assist in the Earth's rebalancing where we can, and help humanity weather the changes. He turned back to the Guardians on the screen. Great ones, how can we best align ourselves with Gaia's awakening? The Desert Guardian, its form shimmering like a heat mirage, answered, Remember the dance, young Guardians. Move in harmony with the rhythms of the Earth. Guide, but do not force. Protect, but allow for necessary change. As the Guardians faded from the screen, Jack addressed his team. You heard them. We need to adapt our Harmony protocol to a global scale. Lily, coordinate with world governments. We need to start large-scale evacuations from high-risk areas. Thomas, work on adapting our regenerative tech to stabilize critical ecosystems. Emma, I need you to lead our marine response teams. The room burst into action, each Guardian embracing their role in this new chapter of Earth's history. As Jack watched his team work, he felt a profound sense of purpose wash over him. The eternal waltz continues, he murmured to himself. And now, we dance with Gaia herself. Outside, the sky shimmered with auroras visible even in daylight, a testament to the profound changes sweeping the planet. The greatest challenge of the Guardians had just begun, but with it came the promise of a truly harmonious future between humanity and the living Earth. 1 year had passed since Gaia's awakening, and the world was barely recognizable. Jack stood on the balcony of the Guardian Coordination Center, now a towering structure of living crystal and organic technology that pulsed in rhythm with the Earth's energy. Lily joined him, her eyes reflecting the shimmer of the aurora that now permanently painted the sky. It's beautiful, isn't it? Who would have thought our journey would lead us here? Jack nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. It's been a hard year, but we're finally seeing the fruits of our labor. Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas, who burst onto the balcony, his excitement palpable. Jack, Lily, you need to see this. They followed him to the main hall, where a massive holographic globe dominated the center. Emma and Amir were already there, their faces lit with wonder. Watch this, Thomas said, manipulating the controls. The globe zoomed in on what used to be the Sahara Desert. Instead of endless sand, they saw a lush, thriving ecosystem. Is that a rainforest? Lily gasped. Emma nodded, her voice filled with awe. The Earth's shifting patterns have brought regular rainfall to the region. Our adaptive flora has taken root, accelerating the transformation. Amir chimed in, pointing to another area of the globe. And look here, in the Arctic. The new ice formations have created a network of habitats perfectly suited for both existing and evolving species. As they marveled at the changes, a familiar rumble filled the room. The Guardians materialized around them, their forms now more distinct and vibrant than ever before. The Amazon Guardian spoke first, its voice resonating with joy. You have done well, young Guardians. The Earth sings with renewed vitality. Jack bowed his head in respect. We couldn't have done it without your guidance, but surely our work isn't finished? The Mountain Guardian rumbled a laugh. The work of harmony is never finished, young one, but a new phase begins. The Ocean Guardian, its form now a dazzling display of bioluminescence, added, The great changes have settled. Now comes the time of refinement and growth. Maria, who had been quietly analyzing data in the corner, suddenly spoke up. I think I understand. Look at these readings. She projected a series of charts onto the globe. The extreme fluctuations we've been seeing are starting to stabilize. It's as if the Earth has found its new rhythm, Jack finished, realization dawning on his face. The Desert Guardian, now a shimmering mirage of greenery and sand, nodded approvingly. Indeed. And now you must learn to dance to this new tune. Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. So our role now is to help maintain this new balance, to guide both the planet and humanity as we adapt to these changes? Precisely, the Amazon Guardian confirmed. The bond between humanity and Gaia has been renewed. You are no longer separate, but part of a greater whole. As the Guardians faded away, Jack turned to his team, his eyes shining with purpose. You heard them. Our work enters a new phase. We need to redouble our efforts on education and integration. Humanity needs to learn how to live in this new world. Emma nodded enthusiastically. I'll coordinate with our marine teams. We need to establish guidelines for the new ocean currents and fishing practices. I'll work on updating our adaptive flora to support the new ecosystems, Thomas added. Amir stepped forward, his face serious. We also need to address the displaced populations. Not everyone has adapted well to the changes. Jack placed a hand on Amir's shoulder. You're right. Lily, can you take charge of our humanitarian efforts? We need to ensure no one gets left behind in this new world. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Jack took one last look at the holographic globe. The pulsing ley lines now formed a complex, beautiful pattern across the Earth's surface, a visual representation of the planet's renewed vitality. The eternal waltz continues, he murmured to himself. But now, we're all dancing together. Outside, the living city hummed with energy, its structures growing and adapting in harmony with the needs of its inhabitants. Birds soared through the air, their feathers shimmering with bioluminescence, while new species of plants climbed up the sides of buildings, purifying the air. The Guardians had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, ushering in a new era of true symbiosis between humanity and the Earth. And yet, Jack knew, their greatest adventures still lay ahead. For in this new, awakened world, every day brought fresh wonders and new challenges to overcome. The dance of life had taken on a whole new rhythm, and the Guardians were ready to lead humanity through its intricate steps. A decade had passed since the Earth's great transformation. The Guardian Coordination Center, now a sprawling complex of living architecture that seamlessly blended with its environment, buzzed with an energy that was both familiar and entirely new. Jack, his hair now streaked with silver, stood before a gathering of Guardians, both old and new. The original team, Lily, Thomas, Emma, Amir, and Maria, flanked him, their faces etched with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Friends, Jack began, his voice carrying easily through the organically shaped auditorium. We've achieved more than we ever dreamed possible. Our bond with Gaia has reshaped the world, but today, we face a new frontier. He gestured, and a holographic display sprang to life, showing a series of unusual astronomical readings. For the past month, we've been detecting strange energy patterns from space, patterns that resonate with our planet's ley lines. A murmur ran through the crowd. Lily stepped forward, her eyes wide with realization. Are you saying what I think you're saying, Jack? He nodded solemnly. We believe we're receiving a message, not just from space, but from other living planets. The room erupted in excited chatter. Thomas raised his hand, calling for quiet. We've been working to decode these signals. They're complex, but they seem to be an invitation. An invitation to what? A young Guardian called out from the audience. Emma took over, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her words. An invitation to join a cosmic network of living planets. It seems Earth's awakening has attracted attention on a galactic scale. The implications hung heavy in the air. Amir broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. This could be an unprecedented opportunity for growth and learning. but it also presents new challenges. How do we prepare humanity for this leap? Jack smiled, a hint of his old adventurous spirit glinting in his eyes. The same way we've always done it. Together, step by step. Maria, what do our global sensors tell us about the planet's reaction to these signals? Maria manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on various regions. Fascinatingly, the ley lines are already beginning to shift in response. It's as if Gaia is instinctively reaching out, trying to connect. As they discussed the implications, a familiar rumble filled the room. The Guardians materialized, their forms now so integrated with the Earth's energy that they seemed to shimmer with an inner light. The Amazon Guardian spoke, its voice resonating with an otherworldly tone. The time has come, young Guardians, for Earth to take its place in the great cosmic dance. Jack stepped forward, bowing his head in respect. We're ready to take this next step, but we need your guidance. How do we proceed? The Ocean Guardian's form rippled with excitement. The pathways are opening. You must learn to extend your guardianship beyond the confines of this world. But be warned, the Mountain Guardian rumbled. With greater connection comes greater responsibility. The balance you've achieved here must now be maintained on a cosmic scale. Lily's eyes lit up with determination. We'll need to adapt our harmony protocol again, not just for Earth, but for interplanetary cooperation. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. I'll start working on ways to amplify and direct our communication with these other living planets. And we'll need to prepare humanity, Emma added. This changes everything. Our understanding of our place in the universe, our potential future. Jack looked around at his team, feeling a swell of pride. This is why we became Guardians. To protect, to nurture, to grow. Our dance has always been about harmony. Now we're just expanding our dance floor to include the stars. As the meeting adjourned, Guardians new and old broke into excited discussion groups, already brainstorming ways to meet this new challenge. Jack stepped out onto a balcony, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The aurora borealis danced overhead, but now he could almost see the tendrils of energy reaching out into space, seeking connection. The eternal waltz continues, he murmured, on a scale we never imagined. Behind him, the living city pulsed with renewed energy, as if the very buildings and plants could sense the cosmic shift taking place. Humanity stood on the brink of a new era, one that would redefine their understanding of life, consciousness, and their place in the universe. And the Guardians, as always, would be there to lead the way, step by harmonious step, into this brave new cosmic dance. The old lighthouse stood sentinel on the rocky coast, its weathered exterior a testament to decades of enduring fierce storms and salty winds. Sarah climbed the winding staircase, her footsteps echoing in the hollow tower. As she reached the top, she paused to catch her breath, her hand resting on the cool metal railing. Through the glass-enclosed beacon room, she could see the vast expanse of the ocean stretching to the horizon. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling within her. I knew I'd find you here, a familiar voice called from behind. Sarah turned to see her brother, Mark, ascending the last few steps. His face was etched with concern, his eyes searching hers for answers. How did you know? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark smiled softly. Where else would you go when the world feels like it's closing in? This place has always been your sanctuary. Sarah nodded, turning back to gaze out at the sea. Do you remember when Dad used to bring us here as kids? How could I forget? Mark chuckled, moving to stand beside her. He'd tell us stories about seafaring adventures and mythical creatures living in the depths. A wistful smile played on Sarah's lips. I believed every word. I was convinced there was a city of merpeople just beyond the breakers. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, lost in memories of simpler times. The rhythmic flash of the lighthouse beam swept across the darkening water, a steady pulse in the gathering twilight. Sarah, Mark began hesitantly, About what happened at the reading of the will. Sarah's body tensed, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the railing. I don't want to talk about it. We have to, Mark insisted gently. You can't just run away from this. Sarah whirled to face him, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. Run away? Is that what you think I'm doing? Mark held up his hands in a placating gesture. That's not what I meant. I'm just worried about you. We all are. Well, don't be, Sarah snapped. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Is it? Mark challenged. Because finding out that Dad had a whole other family he never told us about doesn't seem fine to me. Sarah flinched as if she'd been struck. The words hung heavy in the air between them, giving voice to the shock and betrayal that had sent her fleeing to this place of childhood comfort. How could he do this to us? Sarah whispered, her anger crumbling into anguish. To Mom? Mark sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, Sarah. I wish I had answers, but I'm just as lost as you are. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. I thought I knew him. I thought we meant something to him. Mark pulled his sister into a tight embrace, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. We did mean something to him. Whatever else Dad might have done, I refused to believe that his love for us wasn't real. Sarah clung to her brother, her body shaking with silent sobs. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, they held on to each other in the memories of the father they thought they knew. After several long moments, Sarah pulled away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What do we do now? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Mark took a deep breath, his gaze drifting to the darkness beyond the lighthouse. I don't know, but whatever comes next, we face it together. You, me, and Mom. We're still a family, Sarah. That hasn't changed. Sarah nodded, feeling a flicker of strength return. She turned once more to look out at the sea, drawing comfort from its constant presence. Do you think we should try to contact them? Dad's other children? Mark was quiet for a moment, considering. That's a decision we don't have to make tonight. For now, let's just focus on processing this ourselves. We have time to figure out the rest. As if on cue, a cool breeze swept through the beacon room, carrying with it the salty tang of the ocean. Sarah closed her eyes, letting it wash over her, imagining it could blow away the pain and confusion of the day. Come on, Mark said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Let's head back. Mom's probably wondering where we disappeared to. Sarah took one last look at the darkened horizon, where sea and sky blended into an inky blackness. The lighthouse beam cut through the night, a steady rhythm of light and shadow. Like the ebb and flow of the tides below, Sarah knew that this too would pass. The pain might not disappear entirely, but she would learn to navigate these uncharted waters. With a deep breath, she turned to follow her brother down the winding staircase. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together, just as they always had. The drive back from the lighthouse was silent, the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers punctuating the quiet as a light drizzle began to fall. Sarah stared out the passenger window, watching raindrops race down the glass, her mind still churning with the revelations of the day. As Mark pulled into their mother's driveway, Sarah's stomach clenched. The warm glow of lights from within the house should have been inviting, but now it felt like a beacon of impending confrontation. You ready? Mark asked, killing the engine. Sarah took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. They found their mother Claire in the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a futile attempt at comfort on a night like this. Claire looked up as they entered, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. There you are, she said, her voice hoarse. I was starting to worry. Sorry, Mom, Mark replied, moving to give her a hug. We just needed some time to process, Claire nodded, squeezing her son tightly before releasing him. Her gaze shifted to Sarah, who still hovered uncertainly in the doorway. Sarah, honey, Claire began, Come sit down. We need to talk about this. Reluctantly, Sarah took a seat at the kitchen table. Mark poured coffee for all of them, the clink of mugs on wood unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I know you both have questions, Claire said, wrapping her hands around her mug. Truthfully, I have quite a few myself. Sarah couldn't hold back any longer. Did you know, she blurted out, about Dad's other family? Claire's face crumpled for a moment before she regained her composure. No, Sarah, I had no idea. Your father and I, we had our issues over the years, but I never imagined anything like this. How is that possible? Sarah pressed, anger seeping into her voice. He had a whole other life, Mom. Other kids. How could you not have known? Sarah, Mark warned, but Claire held up a hand to stop him. It's all right, she said. Your sister has every right to ask. Claire took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. Your father traveled a lot for work, especially in the early years of our marriage. I trusted him. Maybe I was naive, but I never had reason to doubt him. Sarah slumped in her chair, the fight draining out of her. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to accuse you. I don't understand how he could do this to us. Claire reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand in hers. I don't understand it either, sweetheart. But we can't change the past. All we can do now is decide how to move forward. Have you thought about reaching out to them? Mark asked cautiously. Dad's other family? Claire nodded slowly. I have. And as much as part of me wants to pretend they don't exist, I think we owe it to ourselves, and to them, to at least make contact. Sarah's head snapped up. What? Why would we do that? Because they're as much victims in this as we are, Claire replied gently. They've just lost their father too, and now their whole world has been turned upside down. We're all connected now, whether we like it or not. The room fell silent as the weight of Claire's words sank in. Sarah stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise in lazy curls. The idea of meeting these strangers, half-siblings she never knew existed, filled her with a mix of dread and morbid curiosity. What if they knew about us? Sarah whispered. What if Dad told them and they just didn't care? Mark shook his head. We can't assume anything, Sarah. For all we know, they're sitting around a table just like this, asking themselves the same questions. Claire squeezed Sarah's hand. Your brother's right. We won't know anything until we reach out, and if we don't, we'll always wonder. Sarah pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. She moved to the kitchen window, staring out at the rain-slicked street. The world outside seemed alien now, as if the axis of her life had shifted and nothing would ever look quite the same again. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted, her voice barely audible. She heard the scrape of chair legs on tile, and then her mother's arms were around her, enveloping her in a familiar embrace that smelled of lavender and home. You can, Claire murmured. You're stronger than you know, Sarah. We all are. We'll get through this together. Sarah turned, burying her face in her mother's shoulder as tears threatened once more. She felt Mark join them, his strong arms encircling them both. For a moment they stood there, a fortress of shared grief and love. As they separated, Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. Tomorrow, she said with quiet determination, we'll draft a letter, something simple, just to open the door. We don't have to decide everything at once. Sarah nodded, a small spark of courage igniting within her. Okay, she agreed. Tomorrow. As the night wore on, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, talking in hushed tones about memories of the past and uncertainties of the future. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the last vestiges of the life they had known. In its place, a new reality was taking shape, one filled with unknown faces and uncharted emotional territory. But as Sarah looked at her mother's resolute expression and felt her brother's steadying presence beside her, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. The journey ahead would be difficult, but with each other to lean on, they would find their way through the storm. The next morning dawned gray and misty, matching the somber mood in Claire's house. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper before her, pen poised uncertainly above it. The weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on her shoulders. Mark entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from the shower. "How's it going?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sarah sighed, dropping the pen. "It's not. How do you even start a letter like this? Dear stranger, surprise, we're your secret siblings." Mark chuckled despite the tension. Maybe not quite like that. He sat down beside her, taking a sip of his coffee. "Where's Mom?" "Still upstairs. She said she needed a moment before we do this." As if on cue, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Claire appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. In her hands, she clutched a small wooden box. "I think," she said softly, "before we write anything, there's something you both need to see." Sarah and Mark exchanged puzzled glances as their mother joined them at the table. With trembling hands, Claire opened the box and withdrew a stack of yellowed envelopes. "I found these last night," she explained. "They were hidden in the back of your father's desk. I've read them all." Sarah reached out, taking one of the envelopes. The postmark was from nearly 30 years ago. "What are they?" Claire took a deep breath. "They're letters. From your father to a woman named Evelyn. They tell the whole story." For the next hour, the kitchen was silent except for the rustle of paper and occasional sharp intakes of breath as Sarah and Mark read through their father's secret correspondence. The letters painted a picture of a young man torn between two lives, full of guilt and indecision. Finally, Sarah set down the last letter, her eyes brimming with tears. "He wanted to leave her," she whispered. "To come back to you, Mom. But then Evelyn told him she was pregnant," Claire finished, her voice steady. "And your father made his choice." Mark ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. "But he didn't really choose, did he? He just kept both lives going. For decades." Claire nodded sadly. "It seems he couldn't bear to give up either family, so he lived a double life thinking he could keep his two worlds separate forever." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "This doesn't make it right," she said, her voice rising. "He lied to all of us, to you, to us, to them. How could he do this?" "Sarah," Claire said gently, "I'm not defending what your father did, but these letters, they show a man who was deeply conflicted, who loved both his families. He made terrible choices, but he wasn't a monster." Mark nodded slowly. "It doesn't excuse it, but it helps to understand a little." Sarah stopped pacing, leaning against the counter. "So what do we do now? Do we tell them about the letters?" Claire was quiet for a moment, considering. I think we need to meet them first, face to face. These letters are part of their history too, but sharing them feels like something that should be done in person." "Are you sure you're ready for that, Mom?" Mark asked, concern evident in his voice. Claire smiled wryly. "Ready? No. But necessary? Yes. We can't move forward until we confront this head on." Sarah returned to the table, picking up the pen once more. This time the words came more easily. "Dear Evelyn, Michael, and Catherine, my name is Sarah Thompson. You don't know me, but we share a connection that has only recently come to light. My brother Mark and I, along with our mother Claire, have learned of our father's other family, you. We understand that this news may come as a shock, and we're still grappling with it ourselves. However, we believe it's important for all of us to meet and talk about where we go from here. If you're willing, we would like to arrange a meeting. We have no expectations or demands. We simply want to understand and to give you the opportunity to do the same. Please let us know if this is something you would consider. Sincerely, Sarah Thompson." Sarah read the letter aloud to her mother and brother. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen. "It's good," Mark said finally. "Simple, but it says what needs to be said." Claire nodded in agreement. "Send it," she said softly. "Whatever happens next, at least we've taken the first step." As Sarah folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, she felt a curious mix of fear and hope. They were venturing into unknown territory, but at least they were doing it together. "So," Mark said, attempting to lighten the mood, "who wants to bet on how long it'll take them to respond?" Sarah managed a small smile. "Let's just hope they respond at all." As Claire addressed the envelope with the information they'd received from the lawyer, Sarah gazed out the window. The mist was beginning to lift, patches of blue sky peeking through the clouds. Perhaps it was a good omen for what lay ahead, whatever the response, or lack thereof, might bring. They had taken a crucial step towards uncovering the full truth of their family's complicated history. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but as Sarah looked at her mother's resolute expression and felt her brother's supportive presence, she knew they would face it together, one day at a time. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah had mailed the letter, and the Thompson household was caught in a strange limbo. Every day brought a mix of anticipation and dread as they waited for a response that might never come. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, absently stirring her now cold coffee. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. She jumped slightly as Mark entered the room, his footsteps breaking her reverie. "Still nothing?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah shook her head. "Not a word. Do you think we should have included our phone number?" Mark shrugged, opening the refrigerator. "Maybe, but then we'd just be jumping every time the phone rang instead of every time the mail comes." "I suppose you're right." Sarah sighed. She watched as her brother rummaged for leftovers. "How can you be so calm about all this?" Mark paused, a container of last night's pasta in his hand. "Who says I am? I'm just better at hiding it than you are, sis." Before Sarah could respond, they heard the front door open. Both siblings tensed, listening as their mother's footsteps approached the kitchen. Claire appeared in the doorway, her face unreadable as she clutched a stack of mail. Sarah and Mark held their breath as she flipped through the envelopes. "Bills, junk, more bills," Claire muttered. Then she paused, her eyes widening slightly as she reached the last envelope. Sarah stood so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Is it?" Claire nodded slowly, holding up a plain white envelope. "It's from them, postmarked yesterday." The kitchen fell silent as the weight of the moment settled over them. This was it, the response they'd been waiting for, hoping for, and dreading all at once. "Well," Mark said, breaking the tension, "are we going to open it or just stare at it all day?" Claire took a deep breath and carefully tore open the envelope. Sarah and Mark moved closer, peering over their mother's shoulders as she unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Sarah, Mark, and Claire," Claire read aloud, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Your letter came as a shock, to say the least. We've spent the past 2 weeks trying to process this information and decide how to respond. To be honest, our first instinct was to ignore your letter and pretend we'd never received it. The idea that our father, your father, led a double life for so many years is painful and confusing. However, after much discussion, we've decided that meeting with you is the right thing to do. We have just as many questions as you likely do, and we believe that facing this situation together is the only way to find any sort of closure or understanding. If you're amenable, we would like to suggest meeting at a neutral location. There's a cafe called the Bluebird in the town of Millbrook, which is roughly halfway between our two families. We could meet there this Saturday at 2 p.m., if that works for you. Please let us know if this arrangement is acceptable. You can reach us at the phone number below. Sincerely, Evelyn, Michael, and Catherine. As Claire finished reading, she lowered the letter and looked at her children. Sarah's face was pale, while Mark's jaw was set in a determined line. "Well," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I guess it's really happening." Mark nodded, running a hand through his hair. Saturday, that's soon. Are we ready for this? Sarah asked, looking between her mother and brother. Claire folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. I don't know if we'll ever be truly ready, but we have to take this step. We owe it to ourselves, and to them, to see this through. Mom's right, Mark agreed. We can't back out now, even if part of me wants to. Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Okay, so we're doing this. Should we call them to confirm? Claire nodded. I think that would be best. It'll give us a chance to hear their voices at least. Maybe make Saturday a little less daunting. As Claire reached for the phone, Sarah felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Fear, curiosity, anger, and a strange sense of excitement. In just a few days, they would be face to face with the people who shared their father's love, the secret family that had been hidden for so long. Wait, Sarah said suddenly, as her mother was about to dial. What do we tell them about the letters we found? Should we mention them now or wait until we meet in person? Claire paused, her finger hovering over the keypad. I think we should wait. That's a conversation best had in person, where we can gauge their reactions and answer any questions they might have. Mark nodded in agreement. Good call. Let's just keep this first contact simple. Confirm the meeting and maybe exchange cell numbers in case of any last-minute changes. As Claire began to dial, Sarah walked to the window, gazing out at the familiar street. In just a few days, their world would change again. For better or worse, they were about to cross a threshold from which there was no turning back. She only hoped they were strong enough to face whatever lay on the other side. Saturday arrived with a mix of sunshine and scattered clouds, as if the weather itself couldn't decide how to feel about the day's significance. Sarah stood in front of her closet, fretting over what to wear to meet her newfound siblings. This is ridiculous, she muttered to herself, tossing another shirt onto the growing pile on her bed. It's not like I'm going on a date. A soft knock on her bedroom door interrupted her internal debate. Sarah? Claire's voice called. Are you ready? We should leave soon to make sure we're not late. Sarah sighed, grabbing a simple blue blouse. Almost, Mom. I'll be down in 5 minutes. As she dressed, Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror. The face staring back at her looked pale and uncertain. You can do this, she told her reflection firmly. It's just a conversation. Downstairs, she found Mark and Claire waiting in the kitchen. Mark was pacing, his usual calm demeanor betrayed by the nervous energy radiating from him. Claire sat at the table, clutching a manila envelope that Sarah knew contained their father's letters. Everyone ready? Claire asked, standing up. Mark nodded, keys jingling in his hand. As will ever be, I guess. The drive to Millbrook was tense, filled with sporadic attempts at small talk that quickly fizzled out. As they approached the town, Sarah's stomach twisted with a mix of anticipation and dread. The Bluebird Cafe turned out to be a charming little place, with a blue-painted facade and cheery window boxes full of flowers. As they parked, Sarah spotted 3 people standing nervously near the entrance, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair, and a man and woman who appeared to be in their 30s. That must be them, Mark said softly, stating the obvious. For a moment, none of the Thompsons moved. Then Claire took a deep breath and opened her car door. Well, she said, her voice steady. Let's not keep them waiting. As they approached, Sarah couldn't help but study the faces of her half-siblings. The man, Michael, she presumed, had their father's strong jawline and kind eyes. Catherine shared Sarah's own auburn hair color, a trait inherited from their father. Evelyn was the first to speak as they drew near. Claire, she said, her voice wavering slightly. It's good to meet you. All of you, Claire nodded, her expression a complex mix of emotions. Likewise, Evelyn, shall we go inside? The group made their way into the cafe, an awkward silence falling over them as they were seated at a large round table. A cheerful waitress took their drink orders, oblivious to the tension surrounding her customers. Once she had gone, Michael cleared his throat. So, he said, attempting a smile, I guess we have a lot to talk about. Sarah found her voice. Yeah, you could say that. I'm not even sure where to begin. Catherine nodded in agreement. It's all so surreal. When Mom told us about your letter, I thought she was joking at first. Believe me, Mark said. We felt the same way when we found out about you. A brief, uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Evelyn broke it, her eyes meeting Claire's. Claire, I want you to know, I had no idea John was married when we met. By the time I found out, I was already pregnant with Michael. Claire's hands tightened around her water glass. I believe you, Evelyn. John, he was very good at compartmentalizing his life. Sarah watched as her mother reached for the manila envelope. We found something, Claire said, her voice low. Letters that John had kept hidden. They explain a lot. As Claire placed the stack of letters on the table, Sarah saw a range of emotions flash across the faces of their newfound family members. Shock, curiosity, and a hint of fear. Michael spoke first, his voice hushed. What do they say? Mark leaned forward slightly. They tell the story of how this all began. Dad's struggle with his choices, his feelings for both families. Catherine's hand trembled as she reached for one of the envelopes. May we? Claire nodded. Of course. They're as much a part of your history as they are ours. For the next hour, the cafe buzzed with quiet conversation around them as the two families pored over the letters together. Tears were shed, questions were asked and answered, and slowly, the initial awkwardness began to fade. As Sarah watched her mother and Evelyn talk in low voices, their heads bent close together over a particularly emotional letter, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The secrets that had torn their worlds apart were now out in the open, and while the pain was still raw, there was also a sense of catharsis. It's weird, isn't it? Catherine said softly, catching Sarah's eye. Seeing our parents like this, realizing they're just people who made mistakes, who had lives before us. Sarah nodded, offering a small smile. Yeah, it is, but it's also, I don't know, kind of liberating. Like we can finally start to understand the whole picture. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself relaxing, even laughing at a joke Michael made about their father's terrible handwriting. The future was still uncertain, the relationships between them all still fragile and new. But as she looked around the table at this unexpected extension of her family, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. They had taken the first step towards healing, towards understanding. And while the road ahead might be challenging, they would face it together, two families united by a shared past and the possibility of a connected future.